Philippines Network, Radyo Ronda, DZRL Batac, member kapisanan ng mga broadcaster ng Pilipinas.
Good morning, Philippines! Good morning, Department of Education. Good morning, mga ka-GS. Good morning, Kilian. I'm your friend, Rogin Edward Cordial.
I am your friend, David Rick Manglalan. Welcome to the new segment of our station dubbed as GATA, Gameng Sarsarita.
To be certain that everyone is ready for academic endeavor, may I request you to raise your hands on the air, then wave them 5 times. Alright, let's do it. Raise your hands. Wave it 5 times. Come on. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. There you go. You're cool and pro. Today is another day to learn more about assessment, a continuation of the discussion that Ma'am Charlene had last time. So, Sir David, do you have any takeaway from Ma'am Charlene's discussion?
Of course, sir. I learned that the verb will and adapted cognitive process dimensions and learning standards are crucial in doing assessment.
Oh, yes, sir. So, to start with, let me ask you a few questions. We know that entering into a relationship is not easy. It requires one to be decisive and observant of his or her partner. So, Sir David, I have a question for you. How do you choose your partner, sir? Do you choose your partner based on the physique, or do you assess your partner in different aspects before you give your yes?
Well, of course, I would always apply my knowledge in teaching when I choose my partner. I would always do assessments before I would get into a relationship. You know, assessment is necessary. It is where you can see if your partner is the one right for you.
I like your idea, Sir David. So, in a relationship, it is not enough to stick with the physical aspect of your partner. You also need to assess him or her in many ways. The more you give him or her your assessment feedbacks, the greater is the chance that he or she will change for the better. As a result, you both become more mature and your relationship will grow stronger. That is likened to the assessment we have in education. Today, we are going to tackle the formative and the summative assessments. Speaking of assessment, Sir David, as teachers, why do we need to assess? Do you have any idea?
Well, we assess to track students' progress in the attainment of standards, promote self-reflection and personal accountability for one's learning, and provide a basis for the profiling of student performance.
Yes, you are right, sir. So we actually assess to track students' progress in the attainment of standards, promote self-reflection and personal accountability for one's learning, and of course, to provide a basis for the profiling of student performance. While doing assessment, let us not forget its nature. Assessment shall be holistic, with emphasis on the formative or developmental purpose of quality assuring student learning. It is also standards-based as it seeks to ensure that teachers will teach to the standards and students will aim to meet or even exceed the standards. There are actually 2 types of assessment, the formative and the summative. Let us first focus on the formative assessment. When do you think is formative assessment used, Sir David?
We use formative assessments when we do assessments for learning. When you say assessments for learning, teachers can make adjustments in their instruction. Next, we use formative assessments when we do assessments as learning. This means that assessment is used by students to reflect on their own progress. Moreover, formative assessments may be given at any time during the teaching and learning process. It is a way to check the effectiveness of instruction. It tracks learners' progress using systematic ways that can easily provide insight into a student's learning. Usually, formative assessment is not included in the computation of the summative assessment. Speaking of assessment, what do teachers really assess in the classroom?
Oh, let me answer that, Sir David. So when assessing in the classroom, teachers usually consider 3 aspects: the learning competencies, performance standard, and the content standard. Let us remember that our assessment process should be aligned in the curriculum. In doing so, the adapted cognitive process dimensions and the verb will may be used.
All right. There are also different forms of formative assessments, but today we are going to tackle the authentic and alternative assessments. Let us focus first on authentic assessment. I know that you are already familiar with authentic assessment. Could you give me the meaning of authentic assessment, Sir Regine?
So, authentic assessment is a method of evaluation in which students perform real-life tasks to demonstrate their ability to apply relevant knowledge and skills. It includes a task for students to complete and a rubric which indicates how the task will be graded. It is unique to the individual experience of each student.
In authentic assessment, a school's mission is to develop the productive citizens. To be a productive citizen, an individual must be capable of performing meaningful tasks in the real world. Therefore, schools must help students become proficient at performing the tasks they will encounter when they graduate. To determine if it is successful, the school must then ask students to perform meaningful tasks that replicate real-world challenges to see if students are capable of doing so.
Exactly. So, for instance, we can teach students how to do math, do history, do science, use English, not just to know them. Then, to assess what our students had learned, we can ask students to perform tasks that replicate the challenges faced by those using mathematics, doing history, conducting scientific investigation, or using English.
Before we proceed mga ka-GS, I would like you to reflect for a minute. What are the assessment activities that you do inside your classroom? Are they authentic?
Well, let me add a discussion on that, sir. There are actually different types of authentic tasks that we can give to our students. First is the constructed response. It could be a product like, for example, short answer essay questions, show your work, journal response, concept maps, figural representations, or it could also be a performance like, for example, typing test, complete a step of science lab, construct a short musical, dance, or dramatic response, exhibit an athletic skill. Second, authentic task could be product-based, such as essays, stories or poems, research reports, art exhibit or portfolio, lab reports, newspaper, or poster. It could also be a performance, like conducting experiment, musical, dance or dramatic performances, debates, athletic competition, or oral presentation. So, do you now have a grasp in authentic assessment? Are you now ready to proceed, mga ka-GS? Now let us also tackle the alternative assessment, another form of formative assessment. Sir David, are you familiar with alternative assessment, sir?
Of course. Alternative assessment is any method of finding out what a student knows or can do that is intended to show growth and inform instruction, and is alternative to traditional forms of testing, namely multiple choice tests. It requires multi-assessment methods that rather than sticking to traditional paper and pencil tests.
Exactly. So, more than that, alternative assessment requires students to perform, create, produce, or do something. It uses real-world context or simulations and assesses students on what they do in class every day. It also focuses on processes as well as products. It targets high-level thinking and problem-solving skills. Alternative assessment provides information about students' strengths and weaknesses and uses human judgment in scoring.
Actually, there are different forms of alternative assessments, such as portfolios, journals, conferences, interviews, observations, performance assessment, and self and peer assessment. Alternative assessment may also be in the form of oral interview, story retelling, constructed response items, writing samples, task-based or projects, experiments or demonstrations, teacher observation, portfolios, presentations, essays, or written exams.
Yes, exactly. So, thank you for expounding, Sir David. Very well. Now, let me tell you that we also need rubrics when we do alternative and authentic assessments. I am very sure that you guys are already familiar with rubrics. Okay, so a key to a successful assessment is giving students a clear understanding of what the expectations are for their work. This is especially important for alternative assessment rubrics. Rubrics, especially those that are given alongside an assignment description, are a great way of guiding students towards success. They can also be used to provide feedbacks to students, strengthening the formative component of any assessment method.
You're right, Sir Regine. So rubrics are scoring tools that describe performance expectations for students as set out by the instructor. They can be used for all assignment types. They are also they are usually comprised of four components: a description of the assignment or assessment, criteria that will be assessed, descriptions of what is expected for each assignment component, and performance levels indicating mastering of various components. A well-designed rubric will give a substantive description of the expected performance levels.
Yes, sir. Very good. So there are actually two types of rubrics, the holistic and analytic. So holistic rubrics provide a single score rating the overall perception of the student's performance. This approach is especially useful when a single attribute is being examined. This type of rubric allows for quick scoring, but no detailed feedback. On the other hand, analytic rubrics provide scores for various criteria, give detailed feedbacks rather, and help to ensure that feedback is consistently given across students.
In addition, a carefully designed rubric can offer a number of benefits to instructors and students. For instructors, rubrics are reduce the time needed for grading. They also help in identifying their strengths and weaknesses for students across a class. Rubrics identify patterns in student learning, allowing instruction to be adjusted accordingly. They also reduce uncertainty and improve consistency in grading.
Yes, moreover, rubrics are also beneficial to students as they help to improve understanding of instructor expectations, provide specific feedback to improve performance, identify strengths and weaknesses, and adjust the latter accordingly. As teachers, are you making your own rubrics? Or are you getting your rubrics from trusted resources? How about you, Sir David?
Oh, actually, most of the time I am getting my rubrics from trusted resources, since those rubrics are also fitting to be used in my assessments. There are times that I also make my own rubrics, especially if I do not see any available rubrics online or in books, sir.
Oh, that's nice, sir. Well, I also do that too, sir. Because we, teachers, can never go away from making rubrics, let me give you recommendations to use in order to make an effective rubric. Here are some. First, develop a clear definition of the purpose of the assessment task and its goals. Second, decide on whether you would like to use a holistic or analytic rubric depending on the goals that you want to achieve. Third, define the assignment criteria. You can base these on your learning outcomes and goals as well. As with assessment design, consider what skill or knowledge is necessary for successful completion. Fourth, define the scale you will use in order to measure performance. Provide a description of each level. And for the last, test the rubric and revise if it's necessary.
So now, after you have learned and known about formative assessment, let us be informed with summative assessment. I know you are ready to rumble with great ideas today. Let's start with the definition of summative assessment. What do you have in mind? You're right. Summative assessments are used to evaluate student learning, skill acquisition, and academic achievement at the conclusion of a defined instructional period. Typically, at the end of a project, unit, course, semester, program, or school year. It is a process of assessing the student's knowledge, proficiency, and performance by comparing what they know with what they should have learned. So, Regine, what more do you have there as we are to introduce summative assessment?
These assessments are intended to evaluate student learning by comparing performance to a standard or a benchmark. They often have a high point value, take place under controlled conditions, and therefore have more visibility. Unlike formative assessments, summative assessments are formal and involve clear instructions, expectations, and grading rubrics to measure student comprehension.
Brilliant. The purpose of summative assessment is to gauge students' comprehension of the material presented at the end of a particular unit of work and is often measured with a grade or percentage, depending on the subject. As we delve deeper with our discussion, mga ka-GS, I'll give you a minute or two as you look back to what kind of a summative assessment do you evaluate your pupils or students' learning at the end of a project, unit, course, semester, program, or school year. Is it written assessment, where students will be tasked with writing an original piece such as a narrative or analytical essay, or performance assessment, where students will be required to do an activity or task that will showcase their abilities, or standardized assessment, where students will take an exam created for a given curriculum and will be measured against existing rubric, shared with the students throughout the course, or oral assessment, where students will craft and deliver an oral piece such as a speech or presentation. So, Regine, do you have something to share with the kinds of summative assessment?
Technically, I have here some examples of summative assessment where teachers can actually conduct inside their respective classes. One is end of term examination. A final examination or assessment is one of the most common methods of classroom evaluation. Another is in-class chapter test. There are many examinations that happen at the end of a topic or section of training. So quizzes, midterm assessments, and practice tests are common examples of chapter test. Another is standardized admission test. These tests qualify candidates for a specific program. For instance, the IELTS or the TOEFL are standardized English proficiency exams that demonstrate a candidate's competency in the use of the language. Next is the creative portfolio. A creative portfolio showcases the student's creativity, knowledge of the coursework, and how they have uniquely applied that knowledge. We also have the oral test. Oral summative assessments are used to get real-time and spontaneous responses from learners at the end of a course. The type of interview method you choose determines the kinds of questions you will ask during the process. And of course, for the last one, I also have the hands-on performance task. These simple and creative tasks allow students to put their knowledge to work. Hands-on activities or performances tasks are practical, straightforward, and help the instructor to assess the student's abilities directly, sir.
Wow, that's overwhelming, Sir Regine. So may I also add another or other examples? So we do have here group projects. Getting students to execute tasks within small groups is a great way to test their knowledge. After a training on teamwork and conflict resolution, for instance, you should group the students, assign a task, and watch how they create frameworks and solve a specific problem. Next, we have book reports. Elementary students love talking about their favorite books. Book reports, either as a standard essay format or more creative option, are an effective way to determine if students can apply literary analysis and reading comprehension to a book of their choice. Next, we have multimedia presentations. Multimedia assessments are an authentic way to assess important content speaking and technology skills. Another example is formal essays and reports. Writing essays is an important part of language arts, but communicating one's ideas is a vital skill for any subject. Writing an argument essay, explaining a concept in an expository essay, or using descriptive prose in a narrative essay are examples of effective summative assessments. And lastly, we have here Socratic seminars. They must prepare arguments, anticipate counter-arguments, and use classroom norms to discuss critical points with their peers.
Yes, sir. So it is especially important to ensure that the assessment aligns with the goals and expected outcomes of the instruction. The best practices for writing effective summative assessments include five important evaluative elements. First, we have authenticity. The assessment reflects a range of real-world skills that are authentic outside of a classroom context. Second, we have reliability. The assessment provides similar results across classroom settings, groups of students, and daily conditions. Third, we have the volume. Assessment has not been too regular in the past. Students who have test fatigue will not provide accurate results on any assessment. Next, we have validity. The assessment accurately reflects what students have been taught in the instruction period. And of course, for the last one, we have variety. The assessment prompts students to exhibit skills and demonstrate knowledge in more than one way.
All right, thank you, Sir Regine. So now that we are informed about formative and summative assessments, let us also then compare and contrast these two in some aspects. So starting with their definition. Summative assessment is a type of course evaluation that happens at the end of a program, while formative assessment is a method of collecting real-time feedback from learners during the course.
Yes, on the other hand, formative assessment methods focus on how much the students know. Formative evaluations use different approaches to monitor the students' progress, gather feedback from them, and identifying any learning gaps that need to be filled.
Second, we have here their characteristics. The characteristics of summative assessments include validity, reliability, variety, and practicality. Summative assessment is a standardized method of knowledge-based assessment that is easily reported. This means it always ends up with a concise summary of the outcomes of the evaluation.
Yes, unlike summative assessment, the formative evaluation does not measure the student's progress against a benchmark or rubric, and this means its findings are non-graded. Instead, formative assessments focus on gathering actionable feedback that can improve the learning experience for the students.
Next, we have their types. End-of-term examinations, in-class chapter tests, hands-on performance tasks, and oral tests are common summative assessment types. On the other hand, impromptu quizzes, silent polls, and dipsticks are some of the most common method of formative evaluation.
And summative assessment methods help the instructor to measure the student's performance against a standard or rubric. On the flip side, methods of formative evaluations are used to monitor the student's knowledge as they move from one level to another in the learning process.
All right, fourth, with their purpose. The goal of summative assessments is to evaluate the student's understanding of the course and the course materials are within a specific period. On the other hand, the primary purpose of formative assessment is to observe students as they learn and get real-time feedback on their knowledge and experiences.
Formative assessments use different tools and methods to monitor knowledge and skill acquisition at different points in the learning curve. Summative assessment, on the flip side, is all about grading the quality of a student's knowledge based on his or her performance.
Alright, so let's now proceed to the fifth, which is with their focus. Summative assessment pays attention to the outcome as measured by a performance marker, while formative assessment focuses on the ongoing learning process.
Due to its focus on the ongoing learning experience, formative assessment encourages changes and modifications to the learning process based on the feedback from the program participants.
Sixth, with their feedback. Feedback is an important part of summative evaluation. Although students may receive feedback on their performance, this may not change their grades or trigger a re-evaluation of their performance. Summative assessment is the final evaluation of a student's performance.
On the other hand, formative assessment gives feedback on the student's progress as they learn, and teachers act on this feedback to improve the course, learning material, and the teaching method. After a formative assessment, the students continue to learn while the teacher makes any changes to improve their learning experience.
And lastly, let's compare them with their time frame. Summative assessment happens at the end of a course, training, or program, while formative assessment happens as learning takes place.
Yes, this means that while there may only be one summative assessment for an instructional unit, formative evaluation happens many times within the learning process.
And to ask you my last question, Sir Regine, when do we have to use formative and summative assessment?
Well, I guess you should use formative assessment when you need to monitor students' knowledge and progress on the learning curve. Formative assessment helps you to discover concepts that students are struggling to understand, skills that are difficult for them to acquire, or learning standards they have not yet achieved. How about summative assessment, Teacher David?
You should use summative assessment when it is time to evaluate learning. It works best in cases where you need to evaluate how well the information has been absorbed and retained by the students. Summative assessments help you discover student mastery of the course content.
Yes. So, this is our discussion on formative and summative assessment. There you have it, mga ka-GS, our discussion on formative and summative assessments.
Alright, so like what Ma'am Eileen and Ma'am Jeneline have said, assessment is everybody's business. And assessment has its business in the teaching and learning process too. Now that the nature of assessment is already clear to you, I believe that you will do better in assessing your learners, mga ka-GS. Just like how good you assess your partners in love.
All right. Okay, so that ends our segment. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you learned something from us today on this episode of GATA, Gameng Sarsarita. So this is for your asynchronous activity, mga ka-GS. Gather together as a group. Select a grade level of your choice and a topic in the English subject. For that, make a sample formative assessment and a summative assessment on the topic that you chose. Be sure to use alternative assessments. Submit your work on the Google Drive we have provided on our group chat. Thank you very much.
Once again, this is David Rick Manglalan,
And this is Regine Edward Cordial,
your radio teachers for today's episode in GATA.
Gameng Sarsarita.
Thank you and have a great day.